The dojo smells of old tatami and sharpened steel. Night has thinned to a dim blue glow behind the shoji walls, and dust floats lazily in the still air. Every slow breath into a visible thing. A single lantern hangs near the rafters, its light flickering across the polished floorboards. Beneath it, swords rest in a neat row, each one sheathed, each one silent, each one containing a memory older than the men who train here. A young apprentice sits in seiza, palms resting on his thighs. Sweat from the afternoon's drills has dried on his skin, leaving faint lines of salt. His shoulders ache from kata, and his wrists still tremble faintly from holding the practice sword for hours. Still, his eyes stay forward, unblinking. He watches his teacher, a man who moves with a patience that makes age irrelevant, raise a sword from the floor without sound. The blade leaves its silk wrapping like a breath, leaving a sleeping man. There is no audience, no battlefield, just two bodies, one blade, and the quiet that surrounds everything. The master steps forward. The lantern flame steadies. The sword begins to move. He makes a single cut, slow, descending, almost weightless, and the air shifts as if bowing. The apprentice feels something pass over his skin, not wind, not heat, but intention. The motion is too soft to be threatening, too deliberate to be harmless. When the blade stills, steel gleams like a ribbon of moonlight, as if it remembers some ancient night when it once reflected the sky. "These are the cuts you must learn," the master says. "They were born in the old schools, refined through centuries, preserved in silence. They are not for battle, they are for knowing yourself." The apprentice bows. The lantern crackles. A faint scent of camellia oil drifts from the blade. The lesson begins. Well, id, the first cut drifts downward like a falling moon, not striking, not threatening, simply descending with the soft inevitability of night. The master lifts his sword over his right shoulder, elbow loose, posture relaxed. For a moment, he looks as though he has forgotten the apprentice, forgotten the dojo, forgotten even the blade. His breath slows. His shoulders soften. His eyes lower slightly, neither focused nor unfocused, but resting in a state between. Then the sword falls not fast, but impossibly smooth. The movement traces a diagonal line through the darkness, catching the lantern's glow in a thin silver arc. The air divides around the blade and closes again without a whisper. This cut, he explains, comes from a time when samurai traveled by moonlight and relied on soft motions rather than sharp ones. There is danger in silence. There is threat in gentleness. A floating descent disguises intent, hides strength, and invites the opponent to misread the distance. Most men, the master says, fear the fierce strike, but they die from the gentle one. He repeats the cut slowly, the tip of the blade whispering as it slices through the still air. The apprentice feels its calm settle into the room like settling dust, as if even the rafters are listening. A sword does not always fall like a storm. Sometimes it chooses to fall like a sigh, and that is far more frightening. The of Wade. The second cut is a single straight line, nothing more, nothing less. The master draws the blade into a vertical guard, the edge facing forward, the spine aligned to his center. His entire body narrows into a single path, shoulders stacked, hips square, wrists firm but not rigid. He stands as if pulled upward by an invisible thread. One mind, he says. One line, one truth. Then the sword descends straight down, a movement so clean it erases thought. No flourish, no deception, no force wasted. The blade drops as if guided by gravity itself. Even the lantern's flame seems to pause as the steel passes before it. This is the essence of Ittō-ryū, the school that believed all swords were extensions of a single intention. A true cut does not need speed or power. It needs purity. Strategy clouds it. Emotion distorts it. Fear fractures it. The apprentice watches the blade strike the invisible center line before him, splitting the air with a finality that leaves no doubt. A faint tremor moves through the tatami as the master shifts his weight back into his heel. "You cannot perform this cut," he says softly, "until your mind becomes as straight as the stroke." The apprentice swallows. His spine tingles. A line is simple. Simplicity is hardest to learn. It's sad. The third cut moves differently. The master shifts his stance, loosening his shoulders, letting his wrist relax, and suddenly his entire presence changes, like water becoming fluid after being held still too long. The apprentice has seen this before during sparring matches, but never understood it. "Watch," the master murmurs. A subtle sweep of the blade begins, angled downward, catching an imaginary strike. The motion absorbs the opponent's force, not resisting, not blocking, but receiving. Then, without pausing, the blade arcs upward, rising from the low parry like a wave cresting. A deflection turns into a counter. In a single breath, water returning to its source. The movement feels alive, breathing, rhythmic. It is the kind of technique a swordsman learns only after abandoning the idea of cutting altogether. First, he must learn how not to be struck. Then he must learn how not to think. Only then does the counter-strike appear, effortless and inevitable. The apprentice whispers, "It feels like the ocean." The master smiles. That's why the old school said, "Be still until you must flow. Then, do not stop." He repeats the motion several times. The blade rises, falls, curves, settles. Sweat beads on the apprentice's palms as he tries to memorize the rhythm, though he knows he will not feel it properly for years. In Tanger, the lantern smoke curls for the next demonstration. The air grows thick, as if preparing itself. This cut is not about the blade. It is about deception. The master takes a relaxed stance, sword lowered, almost absent-minded. He looks away, as though something outside the dojo has caught his attention. His shoulders slump slightly. A stance of weakness, an invitation, a lie. Then, without warning, the sword moves. It cuts where the eye is not looking, rising from the lower angle, slicing diagonally across a path the apprentice did not realize was vulnerable. It is not fast. It does not need to be. It is simply unseen until it already exists. A hidden edge. In older schools like Kashima, this technique was revered as the province of those who could kill without changing their face. It is not meant to be skilled. It is meant to be unreadable. "Men watch your shoulders," the master says. "They watch your eyes. They never watch the place where your doubt hides." He repeats the motion, slower this time. Even at half speed, the apprentice cannot predict where the blade will rise. The sword seems to come from emptiness. A visible cut can be parried. A hidden one has already arrived. And the fifth cut begins with a step, and the apprentice immediately understands why most people misunderstand swordsmanship. It is not the blade that decides the strike. It is the ground beneath your feet. The master steps forward, heel touching the tatami in a deliberate, claiming motion as though he is taking ownership of the space the apprentice occupies. The apprentice feels it a pressure on the floor that reaches him before the blade even lifts. Only then does the sword follow. A downward diagonal cut, simple enough on its own, becomes devastating when combined with footwork that destabilizes the opponent before the blade descends. The strike is secondary. The victory comes from stealing balance, stealing rhythm, stealing presence. You cannot strike someone who has already taken the ground from under you, the master says. And if you try, your life ends in the next step. He demonstrates the cut again, step, break, descend, and the apprentice feels pressure before the blade even moves. The tatami compresses. The floor seems to shift. This is why, the elders said, a sword without feet is nothing. End quote. The sixth cut does not move at all. Or rather, the motion is so small, so controlled, that the apprentice feels the force rather than sees it. The master squares his stance. He lifts the blade slightly, barely an inch. The tip aligns with the center of an invisible opponent. Then everything stops. The silence turns electric. The apprentice's heartbeat quickens. This is not a cut of steel. It is a cut of presence. In the old Shinkage-ryū manuals, this was the killing blade that waits, a strike that existed more in the opponent's mind than in the swordsman's motion. Masters could freeze an entire duel with a subtle shift of intent, forcing the opponent into hesitation, panic, withdrawal. A blade like this kills long before it moves, the master says quietly. It kills fear with fear. It kills intention with intention. He breathes out. The tension dissolves. The apprentice realizes the truth. A sword is not dangerous because it strikes. It is dangerous because it threatens. In fact, at last, the master sheaths the blade. His movements slow. His shoulders soften once more. The final cut is not drawn from any scroll. It is not written. It is not taught. It is chosen. The master draws the sword just enough that the edge glints. His breath steadies. His eyes soften. For a moment, it appears he is about to strike a horizontal slash, clean and beautiful. But he stops. The blade hovers in the air, suspended between action and restraint. The room holds its breath. Even the lantern flame stills. Then he lowers the sword. The greatest cut, he says, is the one you decide not to make. A technique of restraint, a technique of compassion, a technique that transforms the sword from weapon to mirror. The apprentice bows deeply. The master returns the blade to the floor. Outside, the sky has turned pearl gray. Morning waits beyond the shoji. The lantern dies with a soft hiss. The lesson ends not with steel, but with silence, because in the old schools of Japan, swordsmanship was never about killing. It was about knowing how deeply a single breath can shape the path of a blade and the fate of a man.